Well, good afternoon, dear friends. My name is Hami Ozordagan. It's my absolute pleasure to be your Master of Ceremonies this afternoon. On behalf of the Spiritual Assembly of the Bahá'ís of the City of Brisbane, I warmly welcome you all to this celebration of World Interfaith Harmony Week. We hope this will be a memorable, enlightening, and uplifting afternoon for you all. Before we commence the program, I just need to bring your attention to a few Zoom protocol matters. So all guests will be automatically muted during the program, but we welcome you to add any comments or questions you might have to the chat. That will be monitored and we'll do our best to respond to any questions or concerns there. Now, as we start, let's acknowledge the Turrbal and Yagara people, the traditional owners of the land from which this event is being hosted. And let's pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. We recognize their custodianship and their role in caring for and maintaining this country over thousands of years. May their strength and wisdom be with us today. So now to begin, we'll have an opening prayer sung by Nava Revolk. Nava.
O thou kind Lord, thou hast created all humanity from the same stock. Thou hast decreed that all shall belong to the same household. Thou art kind to all, hast provided for all, dost shelter all, and conferst life upon all. O thou kind Lord, unite all. Let the religions agree, let the religions agree, and make the nations one. Let the religions agree and make the nations one, so that they may see each other as one family, and the whole earth as one home, so that they may see each other as one family, and the whole earth as one home.
Thank you so much, Nava, for sharing that prayer so beautifully. So once again, a warm welcome to all of you who have joined us. We'd like to acknowledge the presence of a number of honoured guests here today, including Mr. Michael Berkman, MP, member from Maywa, Elizabeth Watson-Brown, attending for Ms. Amy McMahon, MP, member for Ryan, Councillor Vicky Howard of Central Ward, Councillor Peter Cummings, Wynnum Manly Ward, Assistant Commissioner Brian Swan, APM, attending for Queensland Police Commissioner Carroll, Mr. Donald Davis, President, Ms. Claire Moore, Vice President, and Mr. Clem Campbell, OAM, past President of the United Nations Association of Australia, Queensland Chapter, Mr. Gary Page, Director of Australian Red Cross Queensland, honoured guests from South Australia and the Northern Territory, and respected representatives from a wide range of Queensland faith communities, including the Hindu, Buddhist, Jewish, Celtic pagan, Christian, Quaker, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Muslim, and Bahá'í traditions. Welcome all. And while we cannot mention all guests by name, we are delighted that each of you has made the time to join us today. So as you may know, World Interfaith Harmony Week was unanimously adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on the 20th of October 2010, and henceforth that first week of February has been observed as World Interfaith Harmony Week. The resolution reaffirms that mutual understanding and interreligious dialogue constitute important dimensions of a culture of peace. And it encourages all states to support the spread of the message of interfaith harmony and goodwill based on the love of God or on the love of the good and love of one's neighbor. So we thank the United Nations for establishing this important annual observance. And for those who may not be aware, 2022 actually marks the 77th anniversary of the United Nations. And over those years, they've contributed substantially in many ways to make a difference on a global scale. So World Interfaith Harmony Week provides a platform 1 week a year when all interfaith groups and other groups of goodwill can show the world what a powerful movement they are collectively. There are thousands of events organized around the world to celebrate this occasion, and this is one of those many celebrations which has brought us here together. The program this afternoon will focus on the theme, Living a Life of Service. And for the next hour or so, the program will include informative and inspiring presentations from a range of perspectives with 3 musical interludes. So the following representatives from the different faith traditions will present on the theme, Living a Life of Service. Habib Jamal, President the Islamic Council of Queensland, Dr. Asham Majumdar, OAM, Senior Vice President, Vedanta Society, Brisbane Chapter, Reverend David Baker, General Secretary, Queensland Churches Together, Gail Paratz, Interfaith Chair, Queensland Jewish Board of Deputies, Maggie Manshadi and Parnia Yazdani, members of the Brisbane Bahá'í community, and Linda Ward, Elder, Queensland Pagan Hearth. And a note that the second musical interlude, titled Have I Done Any Good?, was contributed by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, friends, in an effort to make this program as accessible as possible, in addition to hearing the presenters, the text of their presentations will be displayed on the slides, and a PDF of that text will also be uploaded to the chat. Throughout the program, we invite you to reflect with us on the positive contributions made by people of faith towards a spirit of service and harmony in the community. So, I'll now invite our first speaker to begin their presentation.
Assalamu alaikum. May the peace and blessings of God be upon us all. Let me start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, and to the elders past, present, and emerging. Respected faith leaders, distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, my greetings to you all. The verse of the Holy Quran, which so comprehensively covers this concept of service to humanity, reads, O people of Islam, you are the best people ever raised for the good of mankind, because you have been raised to serve others. You enjoin what is good and forbid evil and believe in God, Allah. Verse 3, chapters 110. You will remain the best as long as you are service-minded, promote good and promote the welfare of society. If you fail to do this, you no longer have a right to boast of the superiority of Islam and the Muslim community. A society which is insensitive to the suffering of other human beings and is not always inclined to serve the cause of humanity cannot be described as an Islamic society, no matter how much it adhered to other aspects of the Islamic teachings. The fundamental qualities that we must all acquire to serve mankind or to develop a passion to serve mankind are love for humanity, kindness in our hearts for others, a charitable disposition, ability, honesty, a thirst for knowledge, a desire to share knowledge with others, and a constant desire to strive in the cause of Allah by doing good. We must be a people from whom goodness flows towards others. The teachings of the Holy Quran and the example of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, us on how best to serve mankind. The Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, practiced the teachings of the Holy Quran to the fullest extent and is the best example, the true representation of service to mankind and to Allah. The Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, emphasized love, sympathy, and kindness towards all. He also emphasized that we must show each other great appreciation. He said, and I quote, "One who is not grateful to mankind is not grateful to Allah." Thank you.
Hi. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I acknowledge the traditional custodian of the land and sea where we live and work, and we pay our respects to the elders past, present, and future. I would like to thank the Bahá'í Interfaith for giving me the opportunity to be a part of the World Interfaith Harmony Week, and also Swami Abdu'l-Bahá for the write-up. I come from the tradition of Vedanta of Hinduism as practiced and taught by Sri Ramakrishna and his disciple Swami Vivekananda. Let me narrate to you an incident from their lives. One day, Sri Ramakrishna was instructing his disciples. One of the disciples spoke to his teacher about the basic tenets of spiritual life according to a particular sect in Hinduism. He quoted from a book and said, "We have to have compassion towards beings, intense remembrance of God, and take care of the devotees of God." Sri Ramakrishna listened to this, and after a few minutes said, "What? Show compassion to beings? Who are you? A mere human to show compassion?" He said, No, not mere compassion. Instead, look upon all beings as the manifestation of the divine and serve them. Amongst the listeners, his chief disciple, Swami Vivekananda, understood the inner meaning of these words. When he came out of the room, he exclaimed, "Today, I have heard a remarkable teaching from my teacher. He has shown me a new meaning of Vedanta philosophy. When I get a chance, I would like to broadcast this message to the world." And he indeed did this. He set in motion a social and spiritual movement whereby the motto, "Service to beings is service to the divine," was put into practical application through the Ramakrishna Mission Organization. I would like to approach the theme of today's discussion, living a life of service, from this perspective. The whole universe stands on the platform of sacrifice, called jnana in Sanskrit. One of our monks in San Francisco, USA, put this in a very charming manner. He said in a lecture, "It is the sacrifice we make every day, parents for their children and children in return. If I think rightly," he said from his lectern, I am now immersed in the act of worship, speaking to you, but we do not recognize it for what it is. That is our trouble. Be aware that what we do is an offering, a sacrifice, a great ritual. Nothing need to be changed except our feeling about it. Service has many aspects. One is sacrifice. The second is that when we perceive the one behind the many, oneness behind diversity, we'll be able to serve truly and sincerely. We tend to see multiplicity and distinction everywhere. No two things are identical. The basic distinction we observe is between the person who is me and everything that is the other me, other than me. The distinction between I and not I. If there is someone called God, he too is different from us or from me, just as he's different from everybody else and everything else. So what is oneness? How to perceive oneness? Vedanta gives us two approaches. First, the traditional approach, to give an example, when pieces have to be joined together or when cracks have to be mended, we use an adhesive. Love is an adhesive that joins the many into one. Love grows in an unselfish person and it expresses itself through service. So first and foremost, we must try to become unselfish and force ourselves to sacrifice for others and to do good to the others. The second approach is the approach to the social service. With today's globalization, we're all aware that no man is in an island. We're all interconnected with each other, socially, politically, and globally. We have seen how a small virus, which manifests somewhere else, has become a global phenomenon. As such, we are all one. Hence, serving each other and looking after the world around us, giving up our little selves, helps us to find the real identity of oneness. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be with you today, and with the other presenters, I also recognise the First Nations people and their custodianship of our land and our journey of reconciliation that we are on together. There is an ongoing dialogue in the Christian scriptures and in the church's life over the past 2,000 years about the relationship between faith and works, what you believe and what you do. It's a question about what justifies us in the eyes of God. How can we stand before God and live? How can we presume to have a relationship with God, particularly when what we do is not consistent with why we have been created? That is, we are caught between the reign of God and the reign of man. Our better angels know the good. Our life, sadly, does not always reflect it. For some, the purity of the teaching of scriptures is that it is God who has justified us completely by the ministry of Jesus Christ, his identification on the cross with us in our sinfulness, his resurrection, a vindication of that solidarity. This is the jewel in the crown that must not be compromised. We are justified by faith, by the faithfulness of Jesus to God's will. That is the faith that saves. Our flawed faith matters little. Our actions even less. The other side of the dialogue states the obvious. If you say you have faith but don't bear the fruit of it in life, that faith's not real. So demonstrate it in your life. That tension is in the teachings of Jesus. One of his most famous parables is of the sheep and the goats. The people who love their neighbour, particularly the unlovely ones, were encountering Christ and welcomed into heaven, whereas those who were so heavenly minded they were of no earthly use, that is, failed to see Jesus, to love Jesus in their neighbour, lost paradise. This teaching's been lived out in the church, and you can see it in Queensland today, particularly in organisations like Blue Care, Anglicare, Centrecare, St Vinny's, the Wesley Hospital, St Stephen's, the Mater Hospital. These are all manifestations of the call to love one's neighbour as oneself, of the belief that Christ is present in our neighbour in need. New emerging churches are taking this up also. I met the other day with a homeless pastor. No, he wasn't homeless, but his church, which has no buildings of its own, in a sense homeless itself, decided that this ministry, a ministry to people without a home, was that important that it needed a full-time worker. I was deeply encouraged to see the new emerging churches living out the gospel, prioritising love of neighbour over all else. To love God is to love self and is to love neighbour. This is it.
Oh my God, unite the hearts of thy servants and reveal to them thy great purpose. May they follow thy commands and abide in thy law. Help them, O God, in their endeavour, and grant them strength to serve thee. O God, leave them not to themselves, but guide their steps by the light of thy knowledge, and cheer their hearts by thy love. Verily, thou art their helper and their Lord. Verily, thou art their helper and their Lord.
Shalom Aleichem. I also acknowledge the First Nations peoples and pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and hopefully the continuation that we can all work together respectfully. So how my faith and tradition inspires people to live a life of service that benefits the community is the topic. And in preparation for this topic, I turned, as I usually do, to the words of a great sage and a lover of Torah and a recognised voice of Judaism to the world, who we sadly lost in November 2020. Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, and I'm quoting him, "The ideal society is one formed by covenant in which we accept responsibility for the fate of the nation. Societies where everyone is valued, where everyone has dignity, where there may be economic differences but no class distinctions, where no one is so poor as to be deprived of the essentials of existence, where responsibility is not delegated up or down, but distributed throughout the population, where children are precious, the elderly respected, where education is the highest priority, and where no one stands aside from their duties to the nation as a whole. Such societies are morally strong, even if they are small and outnumbered." He states, "There is in Judaism an unbreakable connection between faith and the building of a moral and compassionate social order. Only the belief that every human, as the image of God, has non-negotiable and individual dignity gives us the power and the clarity to overcome the instinctive will to power that has divided most of humanity for most of its history into the rulers and the ruled, the powerful and the powerless. In Judaism, monotheism consecrated the individual. For the first time in human consciousness, the single God confronted the singular person in an unmediated relationship. Unprecedentedly, in the Hebrew Bible, the human person as such was in the image and likeness of God. The intimacy of this relationship gave rise to a new kind of morality, based not on justice alone, but also on love. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your might, Deuteronomy 6:4. Love your neighbor as yourself, Leviticus 19:9. Love the stranger because you know what it feels like to be a stranger, Deuteronomy 10:17. This teaches us that we are all capable of being an influence for good, and that active citizenship begins with the insight that we are worth what we are willing to share with others. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We acknowledge and respect the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, and we pay respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. My name is Maggie, and this is Parnia. In 2019, we were supported and encouraged by our community in Brisbane to move to a country town for a year of service to focus on creating lasting bonds of friendship, to become part of the community life, and to make positive contributions. Understanding the reality of Kingaroy and how to improve it became the focus of our many conversations with the locals. Our goal was to learn what was needed and then serve as part of the local community to inspire positive change. We volunteered at a high school tuck shop, visited families, and engaged in conversations to spark and support social action and transformation. We invited a few friends to study material regarding the importance of youth contributing to their community, which empowered the youth to regard themselves as active protagonists. This conversation highlighted the rubbish pollution around the town, inspiring us to start Clean Up Kingaroy. We see this as one of many ways to cultivate hope for the future of humanity, to foster purposeful action, to work with others, and to promote unity. Abdu'l-Bahá, the son of the founder of the Bahá'í faith, says that service to humanity is service to God, and work done in the spirit of service is the highest form of worship. Abdu'l-Bahá lived a life of service, and his actions infused with boundless love and generosity continue to inspire many to strive for unity and to make a lasting difference. Since our return to Brisbane, Parnia and I have continued to bring many friends from Brisbane and surrounding areas with us to visit Kingaroy and support service efforts there. We have all been so inspired by how the local youth and families contribute to their community and how much of an impact they've made to many lives, all through their selfless acts of service. Inspired by the life of Abdu'l-Bahá, a local youth in Kingaroy continues to put others before himself, reaching out to his friends to offer help and assistance. We continue to visit and support as much as we can because we've truly grown to love the community of Kingaroy.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. I too acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, and I come to you from the borderlands of the Gubbi Gubbi and Waka Waka peoples. The piece I'll present today is inspired by one of my favourite authors, Emma Restall-Orr, and especially by her book, Living with Honour, A Pagan Ethics. Service to the community is not mandated in pagan belief, but that does not hinder pagans from serving in many ways, great and small. Because our faith is based on reverence for nature, its practice is all about our each and every interaction with the interconnected web of life. Our focus is directed on how we live on this planet, how we interact with our environment, its ecologies and tribes, on how we perceive and treat one another, whether that other is a human being, an other than human companion, a tree, a mountain, or a stream. That is the basis of pagan theology. Our service comes from this crafting of relationships as a spiritual act, a way of living with honor. In this way, we are inspired to help those in need, to address wrongs we witness, to fight for those animate and inanimate beings who cannot fight for themselves. By seeing ourselves as an integral part of nature, we inherently retain a conscious responsibility of our each and every action and inaction. We inherently understand the impact our living has upon both humanity and the environment we inhabit. I have a consciousness of myself as an individual, yet I am also a part of the consciousness of woman, of humanity, of the web of life and the natural world. If we allow ourselves to truly be awake to this consciousness, to empathies and influences, if we allow ourselves to actually feel the threads of the web, the resources of our lives are exquisitely extended. Not as a way of taking more from our planet than it can provide, but as a wealth of relationships that can inspire, invigorate, heal, teach, guide, and share. In this way, we serve. Thank you.
Have I done any good today? Have I done any good in this world today? Have I helped anyone in need? Have I cheered out the sad, made someone feel glad? If not, I have failed indeed. Has anyone's burden been lighter today? Because I was willing to share.
On behalf of everyone, I'd like to thank our dear guests for those inspiring presentations. And I'd also like now to welcome Nikki A. Kavari to share a few words about the theme and the presentations that we've just heard. Nikki.
Thank you very much, everyone. I too acknowledge the traditional owners and particularly today draw on their wisdom and their strength as we gather today. I thought that it would be good to start with just a little bit of a reflection on the wonderful presentations that we have had today. It was very obvious in looking at the presentations that there was a very common theme of a belief or a reliance on God or faith as the inspiration for why we serve. The second significant common theme was this need for spiritual qualities. Throughout the presentations, whilst there wasn't an overlap of all of them, there was a recognition of the importance of love, of kindness, of generosity, of how important it is to sacrifice what we want ourselves for the betterment of others. This really is the epitome of selflessness, but also in our service, persistence, notions of justice and compassion, and that these are all themes that have come out through the presentations today. The third common theme that I identified in the presentations was the power of example. There was reference to looking to the prophet or a central figure as being that source of inspiration of an exemplar of who we look to when we serve. Also looking to the example of other individuals and being inspired by their actions to wish to serve ourselves. And then finally, the other thing I picked up was the importance of institutions with service. And in particular, I make reference to Blue Care and to Anglicare and these other types of service-based organisations that play such a critical role in providing a power of an example and structure to our service. The fourth common theme that I think emerged out of the presentations for me was this notion of mindset or attitudes that we take to our service. There was a beautiful reference to changing our mindset, that we can liken service to being worship, that it's not just an act, that it's actually something that we're doing in service to and in worship of God, and that lifts that act of service. And the other theme in terms of mindset or attitude that really came through for me was the notion that we are noble and that we are inherently one. And so out of this oneness, we see a need to serve our fellow humanity because we are part of that humanity. The final common theme that I identified was this need for strong moral communities, taking away from the individual and going to the societal level of needing to build through purposeful action, that it's a structured process of actually seeking to serve our communities in a more meaningful way. And so these are some of the common themes that really emerged for me in listening to the presentations today. And I have to say that when I had the great honour of reading through the various presentations, I couldn't help but to smile at just the synergy and the commonality that we all share when we look at a theme like service and how critical it is to us. In turning and building on this notion of service, like to consider the theme further in the context of what a life of service looks like, and suggest that it's really about the transformation of our communities, that service contributes to community building, and that when we have capacity to serve, that we're able to transform the community around us. And I would suggest that that capacity to transform our community around us and to be of service starts with love. It starts with love of God, with faith, with connection to nature, to a notion of what we perceive in our own individual world to be God. And that connected to this are these fundamental principles that we live our lives by. And these, what I mean when I say this, are these fundamental principles of notions of oneness, of equality, of truth, noting that we are inherently noble and are worthy of an education. And if we see that and respect that in all, that this is a fundamental principle of our love of God and our belief in God. And that central to this oneness is this notion of the removal of prejudice, that we want all to have what we have because we see all as being created by the same God. And I'd suggest that then in terms of our life of service, we go to the work of the individual, and we can see that for an individual, there needs to be a focus on individual spiritual development and the spiritual insights that they gain, but also in terms of the qualities that they develop and their attitudes to service are all really important factors. But sometimes attitude and belief may not be enough. We need to develop the skills and abilities to really be of service to others. Sure, it can be a simple act, but it might also require more complex service in order to be of real service to others. And I'd suggest that with individual service, as the theme that has really emerged is this interplay between our belief and service, and that these feed off one another. As we serve, our faith grows. As we invest in our faith through prayer, reflection, being in nature, whatever that mode of devotion is, it enhances our capacity to serve. And then extending this idea of the individual, we can then see in the individual's actions of service that they're constantly tapping into these fundamental principles that are at the centre of our beliefs. And then we go over to considering community and how does that individual then operate and function within a community setting. And I would suggest that a community has a capacity for spiritual and devotional character. There was mention of a moral society or a moral community. And I think that this is really developed through the spiritual and devotional nature of that community. How do you come together and lift that devotional character of the community that we serve within? And then also community plays a critical role in terms of building the capacity of its inhabitants, and it's the people who live within the community, that through education of our children, of our junior youth, of our youth, of adults, we have this capacity to be able to build abilities, attitudes, qualities to serve and to be of benefit to building and transforming the community within which we operate. And then finally, that also has a notion of interaction, that as our community becomes more spiritually aware and has a more devotional character, our capacity to serve and desire to serve is enhanced, and that these play, as we're of service, everyone knows how great it feels. You then, that feeds back into your faith and your devotion. The third element that I wanted to touch upon is the notion of the institutions that enable us to serve. And I would suggest that critical to the role that institutions play when they're underpinned by spiritual principles is that they create vision, they create guidance, and they are an excellent source for resources as an individual is seeking to serve within a community, that a common purpose can emerge in the way that those services unfold, with resources being provided and the like. And this interplay between the individual, the community, and the institutions results in lifting and transforming the community in which we reside. I wanted to finish today with a little story about the idea of service. And I found this story when I first read it particularly inspiring, because it is an example of an individual who has really demonstrated selflessness, sacrifice, obedience, devotion, persistence, all of these qualities that are exhibited when somebody serves, but in particular love. And so if I could share with you the story of India Haggerty, who had a dream of Abdu'l-Bahá, who is the son of Baha'u'llah and a example for Bahá'ís, who they look to as being the perfect example. And Abdu'l-Bahá told her to, in this dream, to leave immediately and to take a fellow Baha'i, Mrs. S, flowers and some money. So she gathered up all of her money, set aside what she needed for her own expenses, but was willing to sacrifice the rest, and put it into a small purse. And then at very early hours, 5 o'clock or so in the morning, she was in Paris. She found a taxi and she set about at this early hour trying to locate a flower shop. She kept looking for a flower shop. The first one she went to was closed. The second was closed. And on the third attempt, she found a market that was open at this early hour. And she decided on an armful of red tulips and got back into the taxi. She then drove to the address of Mrs. S, and this involved going across Paris in the early hours of the morning. And she was dropped off at the door of Mrs. S at this very early hour. And she stood at her door with an armful of red tulips and she knocked at the door. She heard some rustling and the door opened, and Mrs. S was standing inside wearing a heavy black coat. And it was obvious that she was crying and that she was in distress. Mrs. S looked at India and at the red tulips and simply burst into tears. She sobbed and sobbed, and then she invited India into her home and they sat down together, and India tried to provide comfort. After she was able to compose herself, Mrs. S asked India, "Why have you come here this early hour in the morning?" India answered that she'd had this dream of Abdu'l-Bahá and that he had told her to bring her flowers and money, and she handed the purse to Mrs. S. Mrs. S was astounded by this, and when she could speak, she said the following words: "You think I'm rich, everyone does, and I did have money, but I ran out, and I was ashamed to tell anyone. There isn't one speck of food in this house. As you can tell, the house is cold. I cannot afford to heat it. I have been suffering and I could no longer bear it. I decided last night to end my life. I awoke this morning and I went out and I put on my coat. I decided to cast myself into the river and drown myself. I went to the front door and was just putting my hand on the doorknob to go out when suddenly you knocked. I opened the door and you were standing there. I could not believe my eyes. 20 years ago, Abdu'l-Bahá came to my house in this city, and when I opened the door to receive him, he was standing on my front porch with an armful of red tulips. And to see you standing there with these tulips and bringing this money, I could not believe it." I'd like to suggest that this is the power of faith, this is the power of love, and this is what true service looks like. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present to you today, and I look forward to enjoying the rest of the program. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki, so much for that thoughtful and touching reflection. So friends, we're coming to the close of our formal program. For those who may be interested, we're uploading to the Zoom chat a PDF of the presentation slides that were shared today. So next is our closing song, sung by the Durban Baha'i Choir, and it's titled "Where There Is Love, Nothing is Too Much Trouble, and There Is Always Time," which is a quote from Abdu'l-Bahá, who Nikki and some others referenced in their presentations. So thank you for joining us. For those who wish to remain after the song, the Zoom will be open for all guests to share their thoughts on the question, how can each of us encourage Australians to live a life of service? So have a think about that question, and we hope you'll stay with us for a moderated reflection session after the song. Thank you.
Where there is love, where there is love, nothing is too much trouble, nothing is too much trouble. Where there is love, where there is love, nothing is too much trouble, nothing is too much trouble. There is always time, time, time. There is always time, time, time. There is always time, time, time. Oh, where there is love, where there is love, nothing is too much trouble, nothing is too much trouble. Where there is love, where there is love, nothing is too much trouble, nothing is too much trouble. There is always time, time, time. There is always time, time, time. There is always time, time, time. Oh, la kukukona, kona uzalo, akuko kuyikinga, akuko kuyikinga, yapo kukona, kona uzalo, akuko kuyikinga, akuko kuyikinga, kunesikati, kunesikati, kunesikati. Oh, lapho kukhona, khona uzalo, akukho kuyinkinga, akukho kuyinkinga, lapho kukhona, khona uzalo, akukho kuyinkinga, akukho kuyinkinga, kunesikhathi, kunesikhathi, kunesikhathi. Oh, there is always time.
All right. So, friends, we would now like to invite you to share your thoughts on this question. How can each of us encourage Australians to live a life of service? So first of all, please feel free to turn on your camera so that we can all see each other. And please use the Zoom raise hand feature to request to speak. So for those who might not be aware, to use this feature, on the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen, you select the reactions button. It looks like this. And then in the pop-up panel, select the raise hand button, which looks like that. And if you're using an older version of Zoom, you'll find the raise hand feature within the participants section rather than the reactions section at the bottom of the screen. So the way it'll work, I will invite guests to speak in the order that the hands go up. And when it's your turn, I'll ask each person, I'll ask you to unmute your microphone and then share your thoughts. So with that in mind, I'll invite anyone who would like to speak to use that feature. Please be mindful of others. Please keep your comments brief and please keep them on topic. How can each of us encourage Australians to live a life of service? So I'm having a look for any hands that go up. Any thoughts on any of the presentations we've heard today? Okay, Heather Griffin, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Oh, firstly, thank you. That was thank you to everyone. And now I've lost the. Oh. Sorry, I've lost you all. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Heather. Yes.
Okay. Thank you to everyone for the excellent words that were presented, and to Nikki for the excellent summary, the way she brought it together just so well. One thing that's always been on my mind when it comes to the whole issue of love and service is the interaction between love for, if I personally want to love someone or do love someone, there's the issue of my good intentions, but then there's the issues of having humility to know that I don't necessarily know that person's needs, and I don't necessarily know the best ways to act, and also the awareness that we need wisdom through education, wisdom from God, however God comes to you, so that love without wisdom and without humility won't necessarily get us very far. But when you've got those three things acting together, you know, it's just a mighty force for good in our community.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on the nature of love and its role. I see Joel's hand is up. So Joel, I'm asking you to unmute and please share your thoughts.
Sure, thank you very much. Absolutely enjoyed this presentation today, and I agree with the last comment about Nikki Kavari's summary, and I really was touched by that story, actually. I think there's two things I'd like to say about how to encourage people to serve more. In the church that I belong to, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, we have a common theme which we typically deploy when we want people to be involved in service, and it's essentially an invitation. It's very simple. It's what Jesus Christ would have said were he around. He said, come and help, or come and see so that you can know what it is that I do and how I do it and why I do it, even, because as you do it, you'll feel those things. And so essentially, that's the simplest way that I can think to encourage people, just to invite them whenever you do something, or whenever I do something personally where I feel I'm inclined to do some service. I often find, who can I bring along that can benefit from this experience besides myself? And on a broader scale, from an institutional perspective, I think that principle works. People love to be invited to participate and to be involved in something, especially if it's a good cause. So when people get that personal invitation, rather than just here's an email or here's a Facebook post or some general communication, but it's actually personally extended, I feel like that has a greater impact and a greater likelihood of success, because people will respond to someone who's directly approaching them and asking for them to, come and give. We need you. We need your help, and we need your skills or your time or your smile or whatever it is. It can be simple things, but it's that personal invitation, I think, that works the best.
Thanks, Joel. Definitely something worth considering, the power of simply reaching out and inviting people personally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like I got invited to this meeting. Someone said, come and see. So here I am. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Joel. Friends, does anyone else have some thoughts, either on something that Heather or Joel just mentioned, or on something that one of our speakers talked about, or anything else that you were inspired by as part of this conversation today? How can we encourage our fellow Australians to be of service? Just looking for any hands in the chat here. I've got one here from Briar. Briar, I'm asking you to unmute. Please go ahead.
What I want to say is that I think people want to feel part of something, and they want to feel that whatever they're contributing is well received. So the way I love that idea of inviting. Of course, inviting personally is really important, but once they arrive, to allow someone to really feel valued for whatever they bring is a way that I find makes people want to come back again, and that it's not a one-time thing. And so that would be my contribution to this conversation.
Thank you, Briar. Yeah, I think perhaps inherently all of us want to feel valued, and one way we can do that is by being of service, of being part of something that's making an impact, and connecting that to Brian's thought. I'm sorry, to Joel's thought. Inviting people gets them there to the point where maybe they will try it and join in something. So friends, anything else? Do you have any questions for any of our presenters? Is there something that you would like any of our presenters to elaborate on a bit further? Or do any of our presenters have anything else that they would like to add? Joel, please. Go ahead.
Sure. I just want to acknowledge that that story that Nikki shared about the woman in India, and a woman with tulips at the door who followed a spiritual impression. Because God loves all of his children, he makes opportunities appear for us. And in that song that was sung, the Alex Boyer song in the middle there, "Have I Done Any Good in the World Today?" I think that's a really interesting principle to consider, that we each have the power and the capacity to make change and to receive and respond to spiritual impressions, to be of service to people around, because there are literally in our sphere of influence and where we are right around us are people who need something. They don't always show it or even say it, but there are people who, if you listen carefully to the impressions that come, and they will come if you have the right attitude, that you can be of great service to somebody. And I've had many personal experiences of that nature. And if it's okay to share one, I just was one night running, I was doing my exercise in the city, and on my way home, I had the thought to call somebody, and it was quite a strong impression. So I immediately rang while I was driving my car using my hands-free kit, of course. And I called the person. I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And they said, "Well, actually, I'm in the hospital right now." I said, "What are you doing there?" He said, "Well, I've got pancreatic cancer." And I said, "Well, are you kidding me?" He says, "Well, would I kid about that?" I said, "Well, I know you kid about a lot of things, but probably you wouldn't kid about that. Which hospital are you in?" And he said, "I'm in this particular hospital." I said, "Well, isn't that interesting? I happen to be driving past that one right this very moment. I'm going to come inside and see you. Where are you?" And as I went in there, he was there by himself. His wife wasn't around, and he just received this news. I saw the doctor just leaving as I got to his room, giving him the news of what it meant to him to have pancreatic cancer and what his prognosis was. And I felt super humbled that God had given me that experience, and him, when he was a man who grew up with a very hard life, and he'd always felt alone, and that no one really knew what was happening in his life, or that people didn't really care. And so it was a reminder to me that God knows everybody, where they're at, what they're doing, what they need. And if we are sensitive, we can be God's hands, if you will, in helping him lift those that need lifting and comfort those that need comfort and be a blessing to people. And that was, such a powerful, one of many experiences like that for me, that have happened in a private thing, something that, no one knew that happened unless I told them. But we can each have that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But we have to want it, and we have to be willing to receive it and to act on it when it comes, those little things, those impressions, those spiritual moments. And that's because God loves his children. We're his children. So he wants us to have good experiences with one another, to connect and to not be alone and to suffer. Like that woman that in that story, that just, I resonated with that story because I'd had that experience of being at a crossroads for somebody in more than one way. I just thought I'd like to share that. Thank you.
Thanks, Joel. Appreciate those thoughts. Yeah, certainly there are a lot of people who can benefit from being reached out to and from the service that we can provide. And like you mentioned, we need to be sensitive to looking out for those opportunities wherever they may be to be of service. Nikki, I see your hand up. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I couldn't help myself to say something more, and that was just due to the themes that are coming up. Like, it really speaks to me about accompaniment and thinking about, particularly in our young people, having had the sort of real blessing to see my own children in their journey of service, but also other members of the community, just how often the point that Briar was making about, that you need to ensure that you sort of really reach out to people when they do show up. I think that process of accompaniment continues on with somebody, that when everybody has the desire, but it's building that capacity and that confidence to know what to do and when to do it and the wisdom of how to do it. And I've just seen that really play out in our community, where you have children and really young ones, junior youth, being really closely accompanied by the youth, for example, who bring them along to things, who organise service events for them, who provide an example to them. But I think that is such an important theme on when we're reaching out to our fellow Australians, is how we work together to build each other's capacity to serve, and that we are there for the journey, not just, inviting and then disappearing, especially in our young. Because what you start to see is, I've just seen generation after generation of young ones come up who then become the leaders for the next lot coming through. And so I think that's a really beautiful service that they all show.
Thanks, Nikki. Thanks for sharing those thoughts on building capacity for service through accompaniment and through example as well. So that's another way that we can, each of us, encourage our fellow Australians to serve. So, friends, I'm not seeing any more hands go up. So last call, if anyone's got any final thoughts or final questions, please just raise your hand. Otherwise, we might bring this portion of the afternoon to a close. So I'll just give a few seconds here for any last minute hands to go up. Okay. All right. So in that case, please allow me once again to thank each and every one of you for joining us. Special thanks to our presenters. I hope you've had an uplifting afternoon. I hope your thoughts, your spirits have been elevated. And I hope that you leave this space feeling like you can be more of service as well. So once again, everyone, thanks so much. Thanks to our organizers especially. And we hope to see you again next year, if not sooner. Thank you.